Hello everyone, I am the Midnight Storyteller. I know you clicked on this video to relax for a while or perhaps to let my voice help you fall asleep. Before you do, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you now? And what time is it? Alright, find a comfortable position and relax. I never believed in urban legends, ghost stories, internet rituals, all that stuff. It was entertaining fiction at best, manipulative clickbait at worst. That was my stance as a skeptical blogger who made a modest living debunking paranormal claims and investigating urban myths. My site, Myth Terminated, had a decent following of fellow skeptics who enjoyed watching me dismantle supernatural tales with logic and science. It was early October when I received an email from a reader named Mika about something called the elevator game. According to her, this ritual originated in Korea and involved riding an elevator in a specific sequence of floors to access another world. Mika claimed her brother had tried it and returned different. She didn't elaborate on what different meant, but her concern seemed genuine. I'd heard vague mentions of this elevator ritual before but had dismissed it as just another internet legend like Bloody Mary or the Midnight Man. Still, it seemed perfect for my Halloween content calendar attempt. The ritual, document the predictable failure, explain the psychological factors that make people believe something happened, and wrap it all up in a tidy blog post. The rules were simple yet specific. Find a building with at least 10 floors. Enter the elevator alone. Press the buttons in this sequence 4262 10 5 17 42 11. If the elevator stops at the 5th floor and a woman enters, do not look at her or speak to her. Press 1 to return to the lobby. If the ritual works when the doors open, you'll be in an alternate reality, a world that looks like ours but isn't quite right. To return, you must repeat the exact sequence before they notice you don't belong. I chose the Grayson building downtown, an older office complex with 16 floors that would be mostly empty on Sunday evening. I brought my camera, voice recorder, and a small notebook. I wasn't expecting anything supernatural to happen, but I wanted to document everything for my readers. The lobby was quiet when I arrived at 11:30 p.m. The security guard barely looked up from his crossword puzzle as I flashed my press pass and mentioned I was doing a piece on historic elevators. He waved me through with disinterest. The elevator was one of those older models with a polished brass interior and a slight mechanical whine. I positioned my camera in the corner to capture the entire experiment and hit record. October 15th, 11:42 p.m. I'm about to attempt the elevator game ritual. I spoke clearly for the recording. For the record, I expect nothing to happen except me riding up and down in this elevator like an idiot. I pressed 4. The elevator hummed as it ascended. Nothing unusual. Floor 2. Floor 2 again. Floor 10. As I continued the sequence, I noticed something odd. The elevator seemed to be moving faster between floors, the typical deceleration before stopping becoming less pronounced. By the time I pressed 5 after 10, the motion felt unnaturally smooth, almost like floating. When the doors opened at the 5th floor, I held my breath despite myself. The hallway was empty. Part of me was disappointed. Even skeptics enjoy a good scare. But mostly, I felt vindicated. I pressed 1 as per the instructions. The elevator didn't move. I pressed 1 again. Nothing. I tried other buttons. None responded. The control panel seemed dead, though the lights in the elevator remained on. Technical difficulties, I said to the camera, trying to sound amused rather than concerned. Looks like I might have to call for. The elevator lurched downward suddenly, moving faster than before. The floor indicator above the door was no longer illuminated, so I had no idea which floor I was passing. The descent continued for what felt much longer than it should have taken to reach the lobby. When the elevator finally stopped and the doors slid open, I was confronted with the lobby, but something was immediately, undeniably wrong. The lighting was different, dimmer, with a reddish tint that cast long shadows across the marble floor. The security desk was empty. The clock on the wall read 11:42 p.m., exactly the time I'd started the ritual, but my watch now showed 12:17 a.m. I stepped out cautiously, my heartbeat quickening despite my rational mind insisting there must be a logical explanation. Power fluctuation affecting the lights. Security guard on a break. Clock stopped. Hello, my voice echoed slightly. The acoustics of the lobby somehow altered. Outside the revolving doors, the street looked wrong. The traffic lights were functioning but glowed an amber color rather than the standard red, yellow, and green. There were no cars, no people. The buildings across the street had the same basic shape but different signage, unfamiliar characters that resembled no language I recognized. My skepticism was fighting a losing battle against mounting evidence that something impossible had happened. I took out my phone to call anyone, but there was no signal. The screen displayed only emergency calls only despite having had full bars minutes earlier. I walked to the revolving doors and pushed through them. The air outside felt heavy and carried a metallic taste. The sky above was the wrong color, deep burgundy rather than black, without stars or moon. This isn't possible, I whispered, recording everything with my camera. There has to be an explanation. A distant sound caught my attention, something between a siren and a whale song, echoing between the buildings. I felt a primal urge to hide, to get back to the elevator immediately. I hurried back inside, my calm skepticism completely abandoned. Whatever was happening, hallucination, elaborate prank, or the impossible, I needed to reverse it. Back in the elevator, I tried to steady my breathing as I repeated the sequence 426210, 51742. The elevator moved normally at first, but as I pressed the later numbers in the sequence, the lights began to flicker. Between the 7th and 4th floors, the elevator stopped completely, and the lights went out. In the sudden darkness, I felt a shift in the air, as if someone else had entered the space with me. The elevator was small. I should have felt or heard anyone who entered, but there had been no sound of doors opening. Yet I was certain I was no longer alone. Hello? I called out, my voice embarrassingly unsteady. Is someone there? No response, but I heard breathing, soft, measured breaths that weren't synchronized with my own. I fumbled for my phone, turning on its flashlight. The beam illuminated an empty elevator. I was alone, yet the sound of breathing continued. The lights flickered back on suddenly, and the elevator resumed its descent. When the doors opened, I was looking at the normal lobby of the Grayson building. The security guard was at his desk. The lights were the proper fluorescent white, and my phone showed both the correct time and full signal. I stumbled out, disoriented and confused. You okay there? The security guard asked, looking up from his puzzle. How long was I upstairs? I asked. He checked his watch. About 20 minutes. Everything all right? 20 minutes. It had felt much longer. Yeah, fine. I managed. Just got a little dizzy in the elevator. I left the building quickly, eager to get home and review my footage. The night air felt wonderfully normal. The street busy with late-night traffic and pedestrians. Whatever had happened, or whatever I thought had happened, was over. At home, I immediately connected my camera to my computer and opened the video file. The footage showed me entering the elevator, announcing the experiment, and pressing the buttons in sequence. The elevator moved normally between floors. When it reached the 5th floor, the doors opened to an empty hallway, just as I remembered, but then something strange happened in the video. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, there was a brief moment, just a few frames, where the image distorted. When it cleared, I was still alone in the elevator, but my posture had changed slightly. My expression was different, too, more alert, almost predatory. I watched in growing horror as the elevator reached the lobby and the doors opened. The footage showed me stepping out, looking around, and then leaving the building, all actions I remembered taking. But there was something off about my movements, something subtly wrong in the way I held myself. And then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the reflection of the brass elevator wall, just as I was exiting, there was a figure standing behind me, a figure that wasn't visible in the main shot of the elevator. A figure with my face pounding silently on the reflective surface, mouth open in a scream. I couldn't hear. I slammed my laptop closed, heart racing. This wasn't possible. It had to be a video artifact, a glitch in the recording. I tried to calm myself, to think rationally. Even if something strange had happened, I was home now. I was safe. Whatever I thought I'd seen in that reflection was just my imagination, fueled by the power of suggestion and the urban legend itself. I decided to take a shower, hoping the hot water would clear my head. As I stood under the spray, I noticed a small mark on my wrist that I didn't recognize, a tiny symbol that looked like a simplified elevator button. I scrubbed at it, but it didn't wash away. Over the next few days, I tried to return to my normal routine, but things kept shifting. Small details in my apartment weren't quite right. My coffee mug was in the wrong cabinet. My books were arranged differently on the shelves. My neighbor greeted me by a name that wasn't mine, and when I corrected him, he looked at me strangely. I began to notice other things too. My reflection sometimes moved a fraction of a second too late. Lights seemed slightly dimmer than they should be. Food didn't taste quite right. A week after the elevator incident, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was simply, "You're not back." The body of the email contained one sentence: "You didn't complete the return ritual correctly." I deleted it immediately, telling myself it was just a prank, probably from a reader who somehow knew about my elevator experiment. But doubt had taken root in my mind. What if the ritual had worked? What if I really had crossed into another world? And what if, when I tried to return, something went wrong? What if the person who came back wasn't entirely me? I found myself standing in front of my bathroom mirror that night, staring at my reflection. "Who are you?" I whispered. My reflection smiled a second before I did. I decided I needed to try again, to complete the ritual properly. Whatever had happened, whatever was happening, I needed to fix it. The next evening, I returned to the Grayson building. The same security guard was at the desk, but he didn't seem to recognize me from before. I made my way to the elevator, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. As the doors closed, I took a deep breath and began the sequence again. This time, when the elevator stopped at the 5th floor, the doors opened to reveal a woman standing in the hallway. She was dressed in a gray suit, her hair pulled back severely from her face. There was nothing overtly threatening about her, yet everything in me screamed danger. Remembering the rules, I avoided looking directly at her as she entered the elevator. From my peripheral vision, I could see her reach toward the control panel. She pressed a button, though I couldn't see which one. The elevator began to descend. I kept my eyes fixed on the floor indicator, watching as it passed level 4 lobby and continued downward to what should have been the parking levels. But it didn't stop at P1 or P2. It kept going. The floor indicator changed from numbers to symbols I didn't recognize. The descent continued for what felt like minutes. When the elevator finally stopped and the doors opened, I was looking at a vast cavernous space that couldn't possibly exist beneath the building. The ceiling was lost in shadows, and the floor appeared to be made of some reflective black material that rippled slightly. Like water but not quite liquid. The woman stepped out, then turned to face me. "Aren't you coming?" she asked, her voice oddly distorted, as if speaking through water. I remained frozen in the elevator, my finger hovering over the button panel. "You've come this far," she continued. "Don't you want to see what's on the other side?" "What are you talking about?" I managed to ask. Her face shifted slightly, features rearranging in a way that human faces shouldn't be able to move. "You think you went somewhere before, don't you? That little glimpse, that wasn't even the surface. There are worlds within worlds, layers upon layers." She extended her hand toward me. "I can show you. Isn't that what you want? The truth behind the myth." For a moment I was tempted. Wasn't this what I'd been looking for? Proof of something beyond the rational world I thought I knew. But then I noticed her reflection in the elevator's brass wall. It wasn't a woman at all, but something else, something with too many limbs and angles that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. I jabbed at the door close button repeatedly. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then mercifully the doors began to slide shut. Just before they closed completely, the woman's hand shot forward faster than humanly possible and caught the edge of the door. Her fingers were longer now, the joints wrong. "You're already part of it," she said, her voice no longer even remotely human. "You opened the door. You let something through." With a surge of desperate strength, I slammed my fist against her fingers. There was a sound like breaking glass, and her hand withdrew. The doors closed fully and the elevator began to ascend. I pressed the sequence of buttons frantically, no longer caring about the exact order, just desperate to get back to the lobby, back to reality. The elevator shuddered violently, the lights flickering on and off. I was thrown against the wall as it seemed to move sideways for a moment, an impossible motion for an elevator. When the doors finally opened again, I half fell into the lobby of the Grayson building. The security guard jumped up from his desk, alarmed by my appearance. "Sir, are you all right?" he asked, moving toward me. I couldn't answer. My vision was swimming, reality seeming to ripple around me like heat waves off hot asphalt. "I need to call an ambulance," the guard said, reaching for his phone. "No," I gasped. "No, I'm fine. Just got dizzy. I'll be okay." I staggered out of the building into the night air. Everything looked normal, the traffic, the pedestrians, the city lights. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong, that I still wasn't truly back. At home, I locked every door and window, then sat in the center of my living room floor, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had I experienced some kind of hallucination, a panic attack, or had something genuinely supernatural occurred? As a lifelong skeptic, I wanted desperately to believe in a rational explanation. But the mark on my wrist had grown larger, the symbol more complex, and sometimes, when I wasn't looking directly at them, objects in my apartment seemed to shift position. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the woman from the elevator, or rather, the thing that wasn't a woman at all. Around 3 a.m., I heard a sound from my bathroom, a soft tapping, like fingernails on glass. I froze, listening intently. The tapping came again, more insistent this time. Slowly, I got out of bed and approached the bathroom door. The tapping continued, rhythmic and deliberate. I pushed the door open. My bathroom looked normal, except for one thing. The mirror above the sink was covered in condensation, as if someone had taken a hot shower, and drawn in the condensation was a sequence of numbers: 426, 210, 517, 42111. As I stared at the numbers, they began to drip, the condensation running down the mirror like tears. Behind the streaks, I caught a glimpse of my reflection, except it wasn't mirroring my movements. It was standing perfectly still, watching me with an expression I'd never seen on my own face before: hunger. I backed out of the bathroom and slammed the door shut. I needed help. I needed to talk to someone who might understand what was happening. I remembered Mika, the reader who'd emailed me about her brother. I dug through my inbox until I found her message and replied, asking urgently for more information about what had happened to her brother after he played the elevator game. Her response came within minutes. "Despite the late hour, I was hoping you wouldn't actually try it. My brother came back wrong. He looked the same, sounded the same, but little things were off. He used his fork with his right hand instead of his left. He couldn't remember our dog's name. He slept with his eyes partially open. After 3 days, I found him in the bathroom, trying to go back. He said he wasn't my brother, that my real brother was still there, trapped. He said he needed to switch places again, to make things right. I didn't believe him. I should have. He disappeared that night. The police never found him. Please, tell me you didn't actually do the ritual." I stared at her words, a cold dread settling over me. I thought about the figure I'd seen in the elevator's reflection in my video, the version of me that seemed to be screaming, trapped. Was that the real me? Then who or what was I? I looked down at my hands, turning them over slowly. They looked like my hands, they felt like my hands. But were they? The mark on my wrist was spreading, the symbol growing more elaborate by the hour. It now covered most of my forearm, an intricate pattern of lines and curves that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. I needed to go back. I needed to try the ritual again, to do it properly this time. Whatever had happened, whatever had gone wrong, I had to fix it. But a new, terrifying thought occurred to me. What if that was exactly what it wanted? What if the entity that had taken my place, or part of my place, was trying to lure me back to complete some transformation? What if there was no going back at all? I've been living with this uncertainty for weeks now. Sometimes I almost convince myself that nothing supernatural happened, that I experienced some kind of dissociative episode, brought on by stress and suggestion. That would be the rational explanation, after all. But then I catch my reflection moving independently again, or find objects rearranged in ways I can't explain, or wake up with new symbols etched into my skin, in the space between wakefulness and sleep. I hear the elevator doors opening and footsteps approaching my bed, and a voice that is almost, but not quite, my own, whispering, "Let me in. Let me in all the way." I don't know how much longer I can resist. The borders between worlds seem thinner every day. Reality feels increasingly fragile, like tissue paper stretched over something vast and hungry. If you're reading this, it's because I've decided to try the ritual one last time. I'm going back to the Grayson building tonight. Back to that elevator. I don't know what will happen, but I know I can't continue like this, caught between worlds, neither fully here nor there. So consider this my final blog post, my last debunking attempt. Though I suppose it's not really a debunking at all, is it? More of a warning. The elevator game is real, the other world is real, and the boundaries between them are more permeable than any of us want to believe. Don't play the game. Don't press those buttons. Don't go looking for doors that were never meant to be opened. Because something might come through, or worse, something might come back in your place. Story 2. I never thought I'd be afraid of my own windows. That's the thing about fear, it finds you in the places you've always felt safest. For me, that place was my home, a modest 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of town, where the neighborhoods gradually surrender to pine forests and winding country roads. I'd moved there 3 years ago, drawn by the affordable mortgage and the promise of quiet after a decade in the city. Working as a remote editor meant I could live anywhere with reliable internet. And this place, with its wraparound porch and garden space, seemed perfect. The first 2 winters passed uneventfully. I settled into a comfortable routine. Wake up, make coffee, work at my desk, overlooking the backyard, occasionally venture into town for groceries or a drink with the few acquaintances I'd made. I wasn't particularly social, but I wasn't a hermit either. Just someone who appreciated solitude and the soft sounds of nature over the constant buzz of urban life. It was during the 3rd winter that everything changed. December had brought unusually heavy snowfall that year. The kind that muffles the world and makes everything eerily quiet. I remember sitting at my desk one evening, finishing up some edits on a manuscript, when the power flickered just once, briefly before stabilizing again. I glanced up from my screen, momentarily disoriented by the darkness that had settled outside while I was working. That's when I saw it for the first time. A figure was standing in my backyard about 20 feet from the house, partially obscured by gently falling snow. It was tall and slender, dressed in what appeared to be a dark suit, but what made my blood run cold was its head, or rather, where its head should have been. In the dim light cast from my window, I could see that the figure had no discernible facial features, just a smooth, pale oval where a face should be. I blinked hard, certain I was seeing things. A trick of the light perhaps, or a snow-covered scarecrow I'd forgotten about. But when I looked again, the figure remained, standing perfectly still, facing my window, facing me. My first instinct was to turn off my desk lamp, eliminating the backlight that was making me visible to whatever stood outside. As darkness enveloped my office, I peered cautiously through the window. The figure was gone. In its place was only an undisturbed blanket of snow, with no footprints or any sign that someone had been standing there moments before. I convinced myself I was overworked, that my eyes had played tricks on me after staring at a computer screen for too many hours. I made a strong cup of tea, watched a mindless comedy show, and went to bed early, dismissing the incident entirely. The next night, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when something drew my attention to the side door. A subtle movement caught in my peripheral vision. The door had a small window at eye level, and through it I could see the same figure standing in my side yard, closer to the house this time. Perhaps 10 feet away, instead of 20. This time, I was certain of what I was seeing. The figure stood motionless in the same dark suit. Its blank face turned toward me, a face that wasn't a face at all. Just a smooth, featureless surface, like an egg or a mannequin. I dropped the knife I'd been using to chop vegetables, the clatter of metal on tile breaking the silence that had descended upon the house. I rushed to the door, flipped on the exterior light, and peered out the window again. Nothing. Empty yard, pristine snow, no footprints. That night, I called my closest neighbor, an elderly man named Frank, who lived about a quarter-mile down the road. "Have you seen anyone unusual around lately?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Someone walking around the properties?" "Can't say that I have," Frank replied. "Not many folks out wandering in this weather." "Everything all right over there?" I assured him everything was fine, just checking in. But after hanging up, I double-checked all my doors and windows, something I rarely bothered with in this quiet area. I also searched online for any reports of strange sightings or prowlers in the vicinity. Nothing came up. The third night, I was determined to catch whatever or whoever was appearing on my property. I set up my laptop camera facing the backyard window and left it recording, while I went about my evening routine. Around 9 p.m., while reading in the living room, I felt a familiar prickle on the back of my neck, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. Slowly, I turned toward the living room window. The figure stood directly outside, no more than 5 feet from the glass. In the illumination from my reading lamp, I could see more details now. The suit was immaculately tailored, vintage in style with narrow lapels. The hands were pale and slender, almost delicate, and the face, God, that face was completely smooth, with only the slightest suggestions of where features should be, like a face drawn on foggy glass, and then wiped away. I froze, unable to move or even breathe. The figure raised one hand and placed it against the window, palm flat against the glass. We stayed like that, in some bizarre standoff, for what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds. Then I broke free from my paralysis and lunged for my phone to call the police. When I looked back, the window was empty. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. 2 officers trudged through the snow around my property, flashlights sweeping across the yard, the tree line, the sides of the house. They found nothing, no footprints, no evidence that anyone had been standing outside my windows. The snow's undisturbed, one officer told me, stomping his boots on my porch to knock off the excess snow. If someone was out there, they'd have left tracks. "I know what I saw," I insisted, though my conviction was wavering in the face of their skepticism. The senior officer, a weathered man with kind eyes, suggested I install security cameras. Peace of mind, he called it, though his tone suggested he thought I was just jumpy from living alone. I ordered a security system the next day, 4 cameras with motion sensors, covering all sides of the house. They arrived 2 days later, and I installed them immediately, positioning them to cover every approach to the house. The system would send alerts to my phone whenever motion was detected, and it recorded continuously to cloud storage. For 2 nights, nothing happened. No sightings, no alerts from the cameras. I began to relax, wondering if the security measures had deterred whatever had been lurking around my property. Perhaps it had been a prankster after all, someone who noticed I lived alone and decided to frighten me. On the 3rd night after installing the cameras, I was awakened at exactly 3:17 a.m. by an alert on my phone. Motion detected, backyard camera. Heart pounding, I opened the app and watched the live feed. The figure stood in the exact center of my backyard, facing the camera directly. The night vision gave the scene an eerie green glow, but there was no mistaking the tall, suited form and the blank face. As I watched, frozen in horror, the feed suddenly distorted, lines of static cutting across the image. The picture breaking up, When it stabilized a few seconds later, the yard was empty. I replayed the footage immediately. The figure appeared clearly, standing motionless. Then came the static, lasting exactly 6.4 seconds, according to the timestamp. After that, nothing but an empty yard. I checked the other cameras. None had triggered, none had captured the figure coming or going. The next morning, I downloaded all the footage and examined it frame by frame. In the last clear image, before the static, I noticed something I hadn't seen in the middle of the night. The figure's head was slightly tilted, as if in curiosity or contemplation. This small, almost human gesture somehow made the whole thing more terrifying. That day, I hung heavy blackout curtains over every window in the house. If I couldn't see out, perhaps whatever was out there couldn't see in. I also called a local security consultant who came and upgraded my system, adding 2 more cameras and floodlights that would activate with the motion sensors. "This is quite a setup for someone living alone," he commented as he finished the installation. "Having trouble with trespassers?" I hesitated before answering. "Something like that." He gave me an appraising look. "Well, this should discourage most unwanted visitors. The lights alone will scare off anyone up to no good." I thanked him and paid his invoice, not mentioning that I doubted light would deter what was visiting my property. That night, I received 3 separate alerts, each accompanied by the same pattern. The figure would appear in frame, the camera would distort for several seconds, and then the yard would be empty again. Each time, the figure was closer to the house. Each time, the head was tilted at a slightly different angle. And each time, no other camera captured its arrival or departure. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in my living room, with all the lights on, curtains drawn, a kitchen knife on the table beside me. I felt ridiculous and terrified in equal measure. The next morning, bleary-eyed and exhausted, I called in sick to my freelance clients and drove to the local library. The town had been established in the late 1800s, and I hoped to find some local history that might explain what was happening.
Haunting.
Hallucination. Whatever it was, I needed answers. The librarian, a helpful woman in her 60s named Margaret, directed me to the local history section. Researching the area, she asked pleasantly. "My house, specifically," I replied. "Do you know anything about the property on Oakwood Drive, the small blue house about 3 miles out of town?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Oh, the Mercer place. Yes, it's been there quite a while." "Mercer, was that the original owner?" She nodded. "Edward Mercer built it in 1923. Lived there until he passed." Something in her tone made me press further. "Was there something unusual about his death?" Margaret hesitated, then lowered her voice. "It was quite the scandal at the time. He was found in the house, in front of a mirror. Self-inflicted, they said. His face was, well, the report said he'd done something terrible to his own face. Cut it away if the stories are to be believed." A chill ran down my spine. Why would he do that? No one knows for certain. He lived alone, was known to be eccentric. Some said he'd become obsessed with his appearance, thought he saw something wrong with his face that no one else could see. She shook her head. But that was 100 years ago. The house has had many owners since then. I thanked her, and spent the next few hours poring over old newspapers and town records. Edward Mercer had indeed been a real person, a businessman, who made his fortune in textiles before retiring to what was then the countryside. The reports of his death were vague, mentioning only that he died by his own hand, after a period of mental disturbance. One article mentioned that he had become reclusive in his final months, covering all mirrors in his home and refusing to be photographed. I found only one photograph of Mercer, a formal portrait taken several years before his death. He was tall and slender, dressed in an impeccable suit with narrow lapels. His face was unremarkable, handsome in a conventional way, with a serious expression. As I stared at the photograph, a horrible realization began to dawn on me. The suit in the picture was identical to the one worn by the figure in my yard. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. Was I being haunted by Edward Mercer? If so, why now, after all these years? And why did he appear without a face? When I arrived home, I noticed something immediately wrong. The front door was slightly ajar, though I was certain I had locked it before leaving. Heart pounding, I considered calling the police but decided against it. What would I tell them? That I suspected a faceless ghost had broken into my house. Cautiously, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Everything looked normal at first glance. Nothing obviously disturbed or missing. I moved through the house room by room, checking closets and behind doors under beds. All clear. It wasn't until I reached the bathroom that I noticed anything amiss. The hand towel was damp, though I hadn't used it that morning. And on the mirror, barely visible unless the light hit it just right, was a handprint, a perfect impression of a slender palm and 5 long fingers. I stood frozen, staring at that handprint. It couldn't have been mine. The fingers were too long, the palm too narrow. Someone or something had been in my house while I was gone. That night, I didn't even pretend I would sleep. I sat in the living room with all lights blazing, the knife still beside me, now joined by a heavy flashlight that could double as a weapon if needed. I kept the security camera app open on my tablet, cycling through the views every few minutes. At exactly midnight, all the cameras went dead simultaneously. The app showed connection lost for each one. At the same moment, the power in the house flickered once, twice, and then stabilized, and I heard a soft sound from the hallway. Footsteps, moving slowly across the hardwood floor. I gripped the knife so hard, my knuckles turned white. The footsteps stopped just outside the living room doorway. For several heartbeats there was only silence. Then, slowly, a tall figure stepped into view. The same dark suit, the same slender build, but now it was inside my home, standing mere feet away from me. Its blank face turned toward me, that same slight tilt to its head. "What do you want?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised one hand and pointed not at me, but past me, toward the antique mirror hanging on the living room wall. A mirror I'd bought at an estate sale shortly after moving in, attracted by its ornate frame. Keeping my eyes on the figure, I slowly stood and backed toward the mirror. When I was directly in front of it, the figure lowered its hand. I forced myself to look away from the intruder and into the mirror. At first I saw only my own reflection, pale, terrified, clutching a kitchen knife. But as I watched, my reflection began to change. My face seemed to blur, features becoming less distinct, as if someone were slowly erasing them. I gasped and touched my actual face. It felt normal under my fingertips, but in the mirror my features continued to fade, until my reflection showed the same blank, featureless oval as the figure standing in my living room. I whirled around, but the figure was gone. The house was silent again. When I looked back at the mirror, my reflection had returned to normal. With shaking hands, I turned the mirror around to examine the back. Taped to the wooden backing was a yellowed envelope. Inside was a newspaper clipping from 1923, Edward Mercer's obituary, and a handwritten note on brittle paper. "The mirror shows what we become. I have seen my fate and cannot escape it. Whoever owns this glass next, beware its truth." I spent the rest of the night researching the mirror online. It had come from the estate of an elderly woman who had died peacefully in her sleep. Before her, the provenance was unclear, but it seemed likely the mirror had once belonged to Edward Mercer himself. In the morning, I carefully wrapped the mirror in blankets and drove it to a remote area, where I smashed it to pieces with a hammer and buried the fragments. For 3 days, there were no sightings, no camera malfunctions, no strange occurrences. I began to hope that destroying the mirror had ended whatever haunting or curse I had inadvertently invited into my home. On the 4th day, I was making coffee when I glanced out the kitchen window and froze. There, standing at the edge of my property, was not one figure but 2, both in identical dark suits, both with blank, featureless faces. One was slightly taller than the other. As I watched, paralyzed, They both turned their heads in perfect unison to face me directly. The taller one raised its hand in what almost seemed like a greeting. That afternoon, I packed essential belongings into my car and drove to a hotel in the next town. I called a real estate agent and listed the house for sale, disclosing only that I needed to relocate for work. I never returned to the property, arranging for a service to pack and ship my remaining belongings to my new address across the country. The house sold quickly, well below market value. I didn't care. I just wanted to be free of it. It's been 2 years since I fled that house. I live in an apartment building now, surrounded by neighbors on all sides. I've avoided mirrors as much as possible, keeping only a small one in the bathroom for essential grooming. I've told no one the full story of what happened. Who would believe me? But sometimes, when I'm walking down a crowded street or sitting in a cafe, I'll catch a glimpse of someone tall and slender in a dark suit, standing unnaturally still amid the bustle of daily life. And though I never allow myself to look directly at their face in my peripheral vision, I can sense that smooth blankness where features should be, and sometimes, in the moments between wakefulness and sleep, I run my fingers over my own face just to make sure my features are still there. Because the most terrifying realization, the one that wakes me in a cold sweat night after night, is that I never learned what Edward Mercer saw in that mirror that drove him to destroy his own face. I never discovered what truth the mirror was supposed to show, and I fear that by destroying it, I've only delayed whatever revelation was meant for me. That somewhere, the faceless visitors are still watching, waiting for me to understand what they've been trying to show me all along. That someday I'll look in a mirror and see my features beginning to fade, and this time, there will be no escaping my fate. Story 3. I never thought much about my skin before all of this began. It was just there, serving its purpose, keeping my insides in, and the outside world out. I took it for granted, like most people do. The occasional sunburn, a paper cut, maybe some acne in my teenage years. These were the extent of my skin-related concerns that changed on a Tuesday morning, in late October, when I woke to find something on my body that didn't belong there. It was small, just above my left wrist. A delicate rose, no bigger than a quarter, rendered in black ink with remarkable detail. The petals seemed to curl slightly at the edges, and a single thorn protruded from the stem. It looked like a tattoo, except for one crucial detail. I had never gotten a tattoo in my life. My first thought was that someone had played a prank on me. Perhaps I'd had too much to drink the night before and couldn't remember getting inked. But no, I had spent the previous evening alone in my apartment, working late on quarterly reports and turning in before midnight, with nothing stronger than chamomile tea in my system. I scrubbed at the rose with soap and water, then with rubbing alcohol that stung my skin red, but the image remained perfect and undisturbed. I even tried a pumice stone, until my skin was raw and painful, but the rose simply reappeared as the irritation faded, as though it existed beneath the surface rather than on it. "This isn't possible," I whispered to my bathroom mirror, running my finger over the unwanted artwork. The skin felt normal, no raised edges, no scabbing, no tenderness that would suggest recent needlework. It was as if the rose had always been there, and I was only now noticing it. I made an emergency appointment with my dermatologist, Dr. Winters, who examined the mark with increasing puzzlement. If I didn't know better, I'd say this was a tattoo that's at least several weeks old, she said, magnifying glass in hand. The ink appears to be settled deep in the dermis. But you're certain you didn't get this done? Positive, I replied, watching her gloved fingers probe my skin. I went to sleep without it, and woke up with it. She ran several tests, took photographs, and even scraped a small sample of skin for analysis. I've never seen anything quite like this, she admitted. Let me consult with some colleagues, and get back to you. I left her office with a prescription for a topical cream that she didn't seem confident would help, and an uneasy feeling that followed me throughout the day. At work, I kept my sleeve pulled down, suddenly self-conscious about the mysterious mark. By the time I returned home that evening, I had almost convinced myself that I was overreacting. Perhaps it was some strange skin condition, or maybe I had absent-mindedly pressed against something that left a remarkably persistent stain. That rationalization crumbled 3 days later when I discovered a second mark. This one appeared on my right shoulder blade, a place I couldn't even reach properly without a mirror. I only noticed it while showering, when I felt a strange sensation, as though someone had briefly touched my back. In the steamy bathroom mirror, I twisted to see a perfect rendering of a swallow in flight, its wings outstretched in elegant curves of black ink against my pale skin. Panic set in then. One mysterious mark could be explained away as an anomaly. Two suggested a pattern, and patterns meant purpose. Someone, or something, was doing this to me. I called Dr. Winters immediately, but her receptionist informed me she was at a conference and wouldn't be back for a week. Unwilling to explain my situation to another doctor, who would likely think I was either lying or delusional, I decided to investigate on my own. The internet offered little help. Searches for spontaneous tattoos or appearing skin marks yielded nothing but medical conditions that didn't match my symptoms or conspiracy theories too outlandish to consider. I was about to give up when a news article caught my eye. Local woman still missing after 3 weeks. Police seek information. The article itself was unremarkable. A 28-year-old woman named Eliza Chambers had vanished while walking home from work. What caught my attention was the photograph. Eliza had a small rose tattoo on her left wrist, identical to the one that had appeared on mine. My mouth went dry. This had to be a coincidence. Roses were common tattoo designs, after all, but as I stared at the image, the similarity was undeniable. The same number of petals, the same curl at the edges, even the single thorn positioned at the exact same angle. I spent the next several hours searching for more information about Eliza Chambers. Social media provided what the news article lacked. More photographs, including one of her at a beach, her back to the camera revealing a swallow tattoo between her shoulder blades. My hands shook as I closed my laptop. This couldn't be happening. It defied all logic, all natural laws. Somehow, the tattoos of a missing woman were appearing on my body. But why and how? That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, feeling as though my skin didn't belong to me anymore, as though it had become a canvas for someone else's artwork, or perhaps a message. When I finally drifted off near dawn, my dreams were filled with needles and ink that moved of its own accord, drawing patterns across sleeping bodies. I woke with a jolt, immediately checking my body for new marks. Finding none, I breathed a sigh of relief that caught in my throat when I noticed something strange about the rose on my wrist. It seemed different, not dramatically so, but the position of one petal had shifted slightly, as though the flower had moved while I slept. Convinced I was losing my mind, I took several photographs of both tattoos from different angles, determined to document any changes. Then I called in sick to work and drove to the local police station. Looking back, I'm not sure what I expected to accomplish. And I couldn't very well tell them I was spontaneously developing the tattoos of a missing woman. Instead, I claimed to have information about Eliza Chambers, which wasn't entirely untrue. The detective who interviewed me, a weary-looking man named Grayson, seemed skeptical from the start. You say you recognized her from the news, but you never actually met Miss Chambers? He asked, pen hovering over his notepad. That's correct, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt, but I think I might have seen her the night she disappeared. Near Oakwood Park. This was a complete fabrication, but I needed some reason to explain my interest without sounding insane. Detective Grayson's eyes narrowed. And you're only coming forward now, because I wasn't sure at first, I said, but I kept seeing her face in the news, and I realized it might be important. He took down my false statement with obvious doubt, then asked if I'd be willing to look at some photographs to confirm it was indeed Eliza I had seen. I agreed, hoping this might give me access to more information about her. As he spread several photos across the table, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In addition to the rose and swallow, Eliza had a third tattoo, a small crescent moon behind her right ear, partially hidden by her hair in most pictures. My hand instinctively went to my own right ear, feeling nothing unusual. Not yet, anyway. Is something wrong? Detective Grayson asked, noticing my reaction. No, I said quickly. Yes, that's definitely her. He studied me for a moment longer than was comfortable. If you remember anything else, please contact us immediately. And Mr. Foster. Withholding information in a missing persons case can be considered obstruction of justice. I left the station feeling like I'd made a terrible mistake. Not only had I failed to learn anything useful, but I'd now placed myself on the police radar with a false statement. Worse still, I knew what was coming next. The crescent moon would soon appear behind my ear, continuing whatever macabre process had begun. Sure enough, the following morning, I felt a strange tingling sensation near my right ear. In the mirror, a perfect crescent moon, identical to Eliza's, had appeared on my skin. 3 tattoos in 8 days, all matching those of a missing woman. The pattern was undeniable now, and terrifying in its implications. Was I somehow connected to Eliza's disappearance? Was this some kind of supernatural phenomenon, her essence transferring to me? Or was something more sinister at work? I needed answers, and there was only one place I could think to look. If Eliza's tattoos were appearing on my body, perhaps other missing persons' tattoos were manifesting on others. I began researching recent disappearances in my area, focusing on individuals known to have distinctive tattoos. The results were disturbing. In the past 6 months, 5 people had gone missing within a 30-mile radius of my apartment. All of them had visible tattoos mentioned in their descriptions. I created a timeline, noting when each person had disappeared, and realized they vanished approximately 1 month apart. Eliza had been the most recent. If the pattern held, someone else would go missing in about 3 weeks. That night I decided to test a theory. I set up my phone to record myself while I slept, positioning it to capture my wrist where the rose tattoo was located. The resulting video nearly stopped my heart. Around 3:17 a.m., the rose began to move. Not dramatically, but unmistakably. The petals shifted slightly, as though stirred by an invisible breeze. At 3:42 a.m., the swallow on my back, which was partially visible in the frame, fluttered its wings, in a brief, impossible motion. And at 4:15 a.m., though I could barely see it, the crescent moon behind my ear seemed to glow faintly for several seconds. The tattoos were alive. I watched the video 17 times, looking for any sign that it could be a trick of light or a digital glitch, but the movements were too deliberate, too organic. Whatever was happening to me went beyond normal explanation. Over the next few days, 2 more tattoos appeared on my body, a small anchor on my right ankle, and a series of numbers on my left forearm that looked like a date, 7/6. I didn't need to research to know these had belonged to other missing persons. My body was becoming a living record of the vanished. The tattoos continued their nighttime activities, growing more animated with each passing night. The rose would fully bloom and then close again. The swallow would fly in small circles on my back. The anchor would rock as though on invisible waves. Most disturbing of all, the numbers on my forearm would occasionally rearrange themselves into different dates before returning to their original formation. I stopped going to work, stopped answering calls, spent hours staring at my skin, watching for movements, trying to decipher what message these marks were trying to convey. Because I had become convinced they were trying to tell me something about what had happened to their original owners. On the 13th night after the first tattoo appeared, I woke suddenly at 3:33 a.m. All the tattoos on my body were moving at once, more vigorously than ever before. The rose petals spun in a circular pattern. The swallow flew frantically against my skin. The crescent moon pulsed with a silvery light. The anchor swung violently from side to side, and the numbers on my forearm rapidly cycled through a sequence of dates. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, all movement ceased. The tattoos settled back into their normal positions, but something had changed. When I looked closely at the rows, I noticed a tiny detail that hadn't been there before. A small droplet of what appeared to be red ink, like blood, forming at the tip of the thorn. Something was going to happen. Soon, the next morning, I received an unexpected call from Detective Grayson. "Mr. Foster, we need you to come to the station immediately," he said, his voice tense. "What's this about?" I asked, though I already suspected. "We found something related to the Chambers case. Something that concerns you." My heart raced as I drove to the police station. Had they somehow discovered my connection to the tattoos? Was I about to be accused of involvement in these disappearances? Detective Grayson was waiting for me in an interview room, a manila folder on the table before him. His expression was unreadable as I took a seat across from him. "Thank you for coming in," he said, opening the folder. "Yesterday we received an anonymous tip regarding Eliza Chambers. The caller directed us to an abandoned storage unit on the outskirts of town." He slid a photograph across the table. It showed a concrete room with various equipment, tables, lights, what looked like medical instruments. "We believe this is where Eliza and possibly others were taken," he continued. "We found traces of blood matching her type, but no body. What we did find, however, was this." The next photograph made my stomach lurch. It was a detailed sketch of a human body. My body, with each of the tattoos I now bore marked in precise locations. Next to the drawing was a date, tomorrow's date. "This appears to be you, Mr. Foster," Grayson said, watching my reaction carefully. "Can you explain why a drawing of you would be in a location connected to a missing woman?" I couldn't speak. My mind was racing, trying to process what this meant. The tattoos weren't random. Someone had planned this, had targeted me specifically. I don't know. I finally managed. "The most concerning part," Grayson continued, "is this notation at the bottom of the drawing." He pointed to a line of text I hadn't noticed. "Final canvas complete. Collection date, 10/7/27. Tomorrow. Does this mean anything to you?" he asked. I looked down at my wrist, at the rose that had started it all, and noticed something that made my blood freeze. The droplet of red at the tip of the thorn had grown larger, and as I watched, it began to slide down the stem like actual blood. "Mr. Foster, are you all right?" I wasn't all right. Nothing about this was all right. The tattoos weren't just moving anymore. They were bleeding. "I need protection," I said suddenly. "Someone is after me. The same person who took Eliza and the others." Detective Grayson leaned forward. "What do you know about the others?" "We only mentioned Eliza Chambers." I realized my mistake too late. In my panic, I had revealed knowledge I shouldn't have had. "I've been researching disappearances," I stammered. "After seeing Eliza in the news, I noticed a pattern." Grayson's expression hardened. "Mr. Foster, I think it's time you told me exactly what's going on, starting with how you knew about the other victims, and why someone would have a drawing of you in what appears to be a kill room." I had no choice. I rolled up my sleeve, revealing the rose tattoo, now visibly seeping a small amount of red fluid. "This was Eliza's tattoo," I said. "It appeared on my body the day after she went missing. Then came the others." I showed him each mark, explaining when they had appeared, and how they moved at night. As I spoke, I could see the disbelief in his eyes slowly giving way to disturbed fascination. "That's not possible," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. "Test the blood," I said, indicating the rose. "I bet it matches Eliza's." Before he could respond, his phone rang. The conversation was brief, but I could tell from his expression that something significant had happened. "We just got another tip," he said after hanging up. "Someone reported unusual activity at the old taxidermy shop on Mercer Street. The caller mentioned seeing someone who matched your description being taken inside. But I'm right here," I said, confused. Grayson's brow furrowed. "Exactly. Which means someone wants us to think you're there. It could be a trap, or a diversion. Or it could be where he's planning to take me tomorrow," I suggested. The detective nodded slowly. "We'll check it out," but I want you in protective custody until we know what we're dealing with. I spent that night in a safe house with 2 officers stationed outside my door. Despite the protection, I couldn't sleep. The tattoos were more active than ever, all of them now seeping small amounts of colored fluid that matched their ink. The rose wept red, the swallow leaked blue-black, the crescent moon oozed silver. Around midnight, I noticed something new forming on my chest, directly over my heart. Slowly, painfully, lines began to appear, forming what looked like the beginning of an elaborate design. This wasn't like the others that had appeared fully formed while I slept. This one was being created in real time, and it hurt, like needles piercing my skin from the inside out. By 3 a.m., the design had taken shape, an intricate key surrounded by what appeared to be human faces, their expressions frozen in terror. As I watched, horrified, I realized I recognized those faces. They were the missing people whose tattoos I now wore. At 4:17 a.m., all the tattoos suddenly stopped moving. The bleeding ceased. Even the pain from the new design subsided. In the sudden stillness, I heard a voice, not audible, but somehow inside my head, speaking through the ink in my skin. "You're the key," it whispered. "The final canvas. The one who will set us free." I must have passed out after that, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the window, and Detective Grayson was shaking me awake. "We found something at the taxidermy shop," he said without preamble. "You need to see this." Despite protests from the officers assigned to protect me, Grayson insisted I accompany him. As we drove, he explained what they had discovered. The shop has been abandoned for years, but someone has been using the back room. We found equipment for tattooing, surgical instruments, and other things. "What other things?" I asked, dreading the answer. Grayson's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Preserved skin, human skin, with tattoos intact. Like some kind of collection. My stomach churned as the implications hit me. Someone had been taking people, removing their tattooed skin, and preserving it like trophies. But we didn't find any bodies. Grayson continued, "Just the specimens, and journals, dozens of them, detailing a process the writer calls transference." "Transference," I echoed. "He believes he can transfer the essence of his victims into a final host through their tattoos. Some kind of ritual that culminates today, with what he calls the final canvas." "Me?" I whispered. Grayson nodded grimly. "You. Though we still don't understand how these tattoos are appearing on your body, it shouldn't be possible." As we pulled up to the taxidermy shop, I felt the tattoos on my skin begin to tingle, as though responding to proximity. The building was surrounded by police vehicles, the area cordoned off with yellow tape. "Are you sure bringing me here is a good idea?" I asked. "Normally no," Grayson admitted. "But there's something you need to see. Something we can't explain." He led me through the shop, past dusty display cases of preserved animals, to a door at the back. Beyond it was a room that looked like a cross between a medical facility and an artist's studio. Bright lights illuminated steel tables, tattoo equipment, and jars of chemicals. The walls were lined with frames containing stretched sections of tattooed skin. A macabre gallery of human artwork. But what drew my attention was the figure seated at a desk in the corner. A man, his back to us, writing in a journal. "We found him like this," Grayson said quietly. "He hasn't moved, hasn't spoken, hasn't even acknowledged our presence." As we approached, I could see that the man's skin was covered in tattoos, hundreds of them, overlapping in a chaotic mosaic that left no inch of visible skin untouched. His bald head, his hands, even his eyelids were inked. "Sir," Grayson called, "we have someone here who wants to speak with you." Slowly the man turned. His face was a nightmare of ink, the designs so dense they almost obscured his features. But what struck me most were his eyes, clear, intelligent, and utterly devoid of humanity. When he saw me, his lips curved into a smile. "My final canvas," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "You've come home." "I'm not your anything," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. "What have you done to me?" He tilted his head, studying me with clinical interest. I've made you a vessel, a conduit. Through you they will live again, the people you killed. I didn't kill them, he said, seeming genuinely offended. I preserved them. Their essence, their spirit, captured in their chosen marks. Skin is just a canvas, but the art is eternal. As he spoke, I felt the tattoos on my body begin to move again, more violently than before. The key on my chest burned as though being branded into my flesh. What's happening to him? Grayson demanded, noticing my distress. The tattooed man's smile widened. The transference is completing, right on schedule. I collapsed to my knees as pain shot through my body. It felt like every tattoo was trying to burrow deeper into my skin, to become one with me on a cellular level. Stop this, Grayson shouted, drawing his weapon. It's too late, the man said calmly. The connection is made. The circle is complete. Through tears of pain, I looked up at him and suddenly understood. You're not collecting tattoos, I gasped. You're collecting souls, he nodded, pleased. Very good. Each mark carries a piece of its owner's essence. I've gathered them, cultivated them, prepared them for rebirth through you. One, I managed to ask as another wave of pain washed over me. Because you're empty, he replied, simply. A blank canvas with no marks of your own, no competing essence to fight the transference. It was true. I had never gotten a tattoo, never marked my body in any way. I had been the perfect vessel. As the pain reached its crescendo, I felt something shift inside me. Not physically, but on some deeper, intangible level. The voices I had heard before returned, no longer whispering but screaming. A chorus of trapped souls fighting for space within my consciousness. What's happening to him? I heard Grayson shout, his voice seeming distant. He's becoming a living gallery, the tattooed man replied with reverent awe. My masterpiece. In that moment of excruciating transformation, I felt a hand grasp mine. Looking down, I saw it wasn't a physical hand, but one formed by the ink of the rose tattoo, extending beyond my skin. Then another hand emerged from the swallow, and another from the crescent moon. The souls trapped in the ink were reaching out, not to possess me, but pleading for release. With sudden clarity, I understood what I had to do. Fighting through the pain, I lurched toward the tattooed man and grabbed his wrists. The moment our skin connected, the tattoos on my body began to flow like liquid, streaming from my skin to his. He screamed, a sound of pure terror and disbelief. No, that's not how it works. You can't reverse the transference. But it was happening. The rose, the swallow, the crescent moon, the anchor, the numbers, the key, all of them flowed from my body to his, adding to his already crowded skin. And with them went the souls, the essences he had trapped. Only now they were angry. Now they wanted revenge. The tattooed man's screams intensified as his skin seemed to ripple and bulge, the designs fighting each other for space, tearing at his flesh from within. He fell to the ground, convulsing, as his collection turned against him. I staggered back, watching in horror as his body contorted. The tattoos were consuming him, each one trying to claim territory, to express the rage of its original owner. His skin stretched, tore, and finally ruptured in a grotesque display that I can never fully describe. When it was over, what remained wasn't a man at all, but a twisted sculpture of ink and tissue, frozen in a silent scream. Detective Grayson, who had witnessed the impossible transformation, stood speechless. Finally, he approached the remains cautiously. What just happened? He asked, his voice barely audible. I looked down at my body. My skin was clear, unmarked, as though the tattoos had never existed. But I could still feel the echo of those souls, their gratitude as they found release, their final moments of peace before moving on. Justice, I replied simply. They got justice. In the weeks that followed, forensic teams identified DNA from 7 missing persons in the tattooed man's workshop. Their families finally received closure, though the official reports made no mention of transferred tattoos or vengeful souls. Some truths are too strange for official records. As for me, my skin remained unmarked, but not unchanged. Sometimes in certain lights or at particular angles, I can still see faint outlines of those tattoos just below the surface, reminders of my brief time as a living gallery. I've developed a new appreciation for my skin now, for its integrity, its wholeness, its role as the boundary between myself and the world. I've also developed a deep aversion to tattoos. Some canvases I believe should remain blank. But sometimes late at night, I feel a familiar tingling on my wrist or my shoulder blade, or behind my ear. A gentle reminder that the barrier between life and death, between one soul and another, might be as thin and permeable as skin itself. Story 4. I first noticed the number on a Tuesday morning, 21900. It was printed on my coffee receipt, right where the order number should have been. I didn't think much of it at the time, just assumed it was some new system the cafe had implemented. The barista didn't mention anything unusual when she handed me my latte, so I tucked the receipt into my pocket and went about my day. Later that afternoon, I was reviewing some financial reports at work when I noticed that same number again, 21900, embedded in a seemingly random string of data. A coincidence, surely. But it caught my attention enough that I circled it with my red pen before continuing with my analysis. On my drive home, I stopped at a red light behind a car with the license plate, Indy K29. My breath caught in my throat. 3 times in one day. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite place what it was about this number that unsettled me so deeply. That night, I woke up at exactly 2:19,000 a.m. according to my digital clock. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, as I stared at those glowing red digits. The number was following me, or was I just noticing it because it had been planted in my mind? I tried to convince myself it was just a case of the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon. You learn about something new, then suddenly see it everywhere. But the next morning, the number had changed. My coffee receipt read 218999, the data in my financial report. When I checked the same section, now showed 21899 instead of 219. And when I left work that evening, I saw a different car with a license plate ending in 21. It wasn't just that I was seeing the same number everywhere. The number was counting down. I'm a rational person. At least, I always thought I was. I work in accounting, for heaven's sake. Numbers are my life, but they follow rules. They don't stalk people. They don't count down ominously. Yet here I was, watching this numerical countdown follow me through my daily life. By the third day, when I saw 21898 on my morning newspaper's date where the actual date should have been, I decided to figure out what these numbers might mean. I opened a spreadsheet and did some calculations. 21900 minutes equals 3065 hours, which equals 15 days and 5 hours. A countdown of 15 days. But to what? I tried asking others if they noticed anything strange about the numbers they encountered. My colleague James just gave me an odd look when I pointed to the 211897 that had replaced the page number on the report we were reviewing. That's just page 34. Mark, are you feeling all right? He asked, concern evident in his voice. I looked again. The page clearly showed 211897 at the bottom, but James couldn't see it. No one could see what I was seeing. By the end of the first week, I was keeping a detailed log of every instance where the number appeared. My bathroom mirror fogged up after a shower to reveal the digits written, as if by an invisible finger. The calories on my lunch showed the number instead of the actual nutritional information. Even my mother called me, and according to my phone, her number was just those digits, counting steadily downward. I stopped sleeping properly. How could I, when my alarm clock would randomly change to show the countdown in the middle of the night? I'd wake up to see 21, the soft red glow of the digits casting eerie shadows across my bedroom. During the second week, I started seeing shadows at the corner of my vision. Just quick movements, there and gone before I could focus on them. They seemed to appear whenever I noticed a new instance of the number. Was something watching me, monitoring my recognition of this countdown? I called in sick to work and spent days researching numerology, doomsday predictions, and psychological disorders that might explain what I was experiencing. Nothing fit exactly. The internet had plenty of stories about people seeing recurring numbers 11, 33, 66, but nothing about numbers that counted down with such precision and persistence. On day 10, with the number at 21,460, I found something while cleaning out old boxes in my storage closet. A journal I didn't remember keeping. The handwriting was mine, but the memories recorded weren't, or at least, I thought they weren't mine. The journal detailed events from 15 years ago, a time in my life that had always been strangely hazy in my memory. According to these entries, I had encountered something in the woods behind my childhood home. Something that wasn't human. The journal described it as tall, with too many angles, speaking without a mouth. The entries became increasingly erratic, describing bargains and promises. The final entry simply stated, "It granted my wish. The price, 15 days, 15 years from now. I won't remember until it's time to pay." My hands trembled as I closed the journal. A memory tried to surface, something about my younger brother's illness. A desperate wish for his recovery. A shadow among trees that offered help. When doctors had given up hope, my brother had made a miraculous recovery 15 years ago. The doctors had called it unprecedented, impossible. Had I made some kind of deal? And was this countdown the approaching deadline? I tried to dismiss it as fiction, perhaps a creative writing project I'd forgotten about. But deep down, I knew. The countdown was real, and whatever was coming for me was getting closer with each passing minute. By day 12, the number 21, 17-2 began appearing in my dreams. I'd see it carved into trees, floating in pools of dark water, spelled out in bones on forest floors. In one particularly vivid dream, I saw myself standing before a tall, angular shadow, offering it something I couldn't quite see. When I woke, my sheets were soaked with sweat, and my bedroom window was open, though I was certain I'd closed it before sleeping. I started noticing other changes too. Food tasted like ash in my mouth. Colors seemed less vibrant, except for the vivid red of the countdown digits that now appeared everywhere I looked. And the shadows in my peripheral vision were growing bolder, lingering longer before disappearing. When I turned to look, on day 13, I drove back to my childhood home, now occupied by another family. I stood at the edge of the woods where I supposedly had my encounter 15 years ago. Nothing looked familiar, yet I felt a pull toward a particular clearing about half a mile in. As I approached it, birds fell silent. The air grew still and cold, despite the summer heat. In the center of the clearing stood a single dead tree, its bark blackened as if by fire, and carved into its trunk was the number 21. Tute's number. I reached out to touch it, and as my fingers brushed against the carved digits, I heard a whisper behind me. Soon, I spun around, but there was nothing there, just more trees, and the distant sound of traffic from the main road. But when I turned back to the dead tree, the carved number had changed to 21. I ran all the way back to my car. That night, I tried everything to escape the countdown. I drove for hours, crossing state lines, thinking perhaps whatever was happening was somehow tied to my location. But the numbers followed me, on highway signs, hotel room doors, even in the static between radio stations that seemed to whisper the digits in a voice almost, but not quite human. By day 14, with less than 24 hours remaining in the countdown, I was frantic. I hadn't slept in days. My appearance had deteriorated to the point where a gas station attendant asked if I needed medical assistance. In the bathroom mirror, my reflection looked gaunt, with dark circles under bloodshot eyes. For a moment, I thought I saw something standing behind me in the reflection, a tall, angular shape, but when I spun around, I was alone. I considered going to a hospital, telling them I was having a psychological break. Maybe they could sedate me, keep me unconscious through whatever was supposed to happen when the countdown reached 0. But something told me that wouldn't work. This wasn't something I could escape by being unconscious. With 12 hours remaining, I returned to my apartment and found the journal again. I read through it more carefully, looking for any clue about what exactly I had promised, or what might happen when the countdown ended. The last few pages contained ramblings about temporary residence and corporeal lease agreements. One line stood out: "It needs a body to experience our world. Mine will do." Cold dread settled in my stomach. Had I promised my body to something? Was this entity coming to claim it when the countdown reached 0? With 6 hours remaining, I sat in my living room surrounded by religious symbols I'd gathered from various traditions: crosses, protective amulets, sage bundles, salt circles. I didn't know what I believed anymore, but I was willing to try anything. The countdown appeared on my TV screen, though the power was disconnected. 26:40, just over 344 hours remaining. No, that wasn't right. I did the math again. That would be more than 14 days. The countdown should be much lower by now. I checked my phone. The time was correct, but the countdown displayed on my screen read 26. I flipped through the journal again and found something I'd missed before, scrawled in tiny letters in the margin of the last page. If conditions aren't perfect at 0, the countdown resets. It can wait. It has eternity. Whatever was coming for me wasn't arriving today, but it hadn't given up. It was just waiting for the right moment. Over the next few days, I watched the countdown continue its steady decrease. I returned to work, tried to resume my normal life, but the knowledge of what was coming hung over me like a storm cloud. The shadows still flickered at the edges of my vision. The number continued to appear everywhere. I spent every free moment researching, trying to find someone else who had experienced something similar. I found obscure forums where people discussed strange encounters and bargains with entities they couldn't quite describe. Some stories resonated with mine: meals made in moments of desperation, prices that seemed small at the time, collections that came years later. One user claimed to have escaped their contract by finding someone willing to take their place. Another suggested that these entities could only collect if you remembered the deal, that forgetting was a form of protection. Others insisted that the only solution was to confront the entity directly and renegotiate. None of these options seemed feasible or ethical. I couldn't pass this curse to someone else. I couldn't simply make myself forget again, and clearly that protection had its limits anyway. And the thought of deliberately seeking out this thing terrified me to my core. So, I watched the countdown continue, day after day, wondering what perfect conditions it was waiting for. The answer came 3 weeks later, when the countdown suddenly began accelerating. The numbers decreased faster and faster until they were dropping by hundreds per hour. That same day, my brother called to tell me he was coming to visit, the same brother who had miraculously recovered 15 years ago. I understood then, the perfect condition was having us both in the same place. Whatever bargain I'd made involved both of us. The countdown would reach 0 precisely when my brother arrived at my apartment. I considered warning him, telling him not to come. But a strange compulsion stopped me. Every time I tried to call him, my fingers would dial different numbers, or my voice would discuss completely unrelated topics. The entity wasn't going to let me interfere with its plans. On the day of my brother's visit, with the countdown showing just a few hours remaining, I made one last desperate attempt to break free. I drove to the woods again, to that same clearing with the dead tree. This time, I brought the journal with me. "I know you can hear me," I called out to the empty clearing. "I want to renegotiate." The air grew still, birds fell silent. The temperature dropped so suddenly that my breath fogged in front of me, despite the summer heat. "What do you offer?" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, sounding like dry leaves rustling and twigs snapping. "Anything but what you're planning to take," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Tell me what you want instead." A sound like laughter surrounded me, though nothing about it suggested humor or joy. "You already gave me what I wanted. Your brother lives because I wished it so. Now I collect what was promised." "But what exactly did I promise?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "The journal doesn't say specifically." The air in front of me shimmered, and for a brief moment, I could almost see a shape forming, tall, angular, wrong in ways my mind couldn't quite process. "You promised an exchange. A life for a life." His was fading. Now yours will take its place. But he recovered 15 years ago. Why wait until now? Time means nothing to me. And watching you forget. Then remember. Then forget again. It has been amusing. Your fear is delicious. The shape became slightly more defined, and I caught glimpses of too many limbs, angles that shouldn't be possible, and darkness where features should be. Please, I begged. There must be something else you want. The entity seemed to consider this. Perhaps. Another exchange. Not your life, but something else of value. What? Your memories. All of them. You will live, but you will know nothing of who you were. Your brother will remember you, but you will not remember him. You will be empty. A blank slate. Is this preferable to you? I hesitated. To lose everything that made me who I was. Every experience, every relationship, every skill I'd learned. Was that better than death? Would I even be me anymore, without my memories? But as I considered the alternative, I thought of my brother. He'd been given 15 extra years of life already. If I died now, would that debt transfer back to him? I couldn't risk it. Yes, I finally said. Take my memories instead. The air shimmered again, and I felt something cold brush against my forehead. It is done. When the countdown reaches 0, you will forget. I drove home in a daze, wondering if I'd made the right choice. The countdown on my phone. Now read just 2 hours. My brother would arrive soon. I tried to prepare somehow, writing notes to my future self explaining who I was, who he was, what had happened. But as I wrote, the ink faded from the page, as if it had never been there. The entity wasn't going to let me leave myself any lifelines. With 30 minutes remaining, I heard a knock at my door. My brother had arrived early. As I moved to answer it, I glanced at my phone one last time. The countdown read. 1 minute left. I opened the door to see my brother's smiling face. Mark, it's so good to see you. I tried to speak, to warn him, to say goodbye, but no words came out. Behind him, in the hallway, I saw the tall, angular shape materialize fully for the first time. It had no features I could describe. Nothing my human mind could properly process. It reached for me with limbs that bent in impossible ways. Mark. My brother's smile faltered. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. The entity's limb touched my forehead, and ice spread through my veins. The countdown in my mind reached 0. And then, nothing. I blinked at the man standing in my doorway. He looked concerned, almost frightened. I'm sorry, I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Do I know you? The man's face crumpled in confusion and pain. Mark, it's me, your brother David. I shook my head slowly. The name meant nothing to me. Nothing meant anything to me. I felt hollow, empty, as if I'd just been born into an adult body with no history behind me. I'm sorry, I repeated. I don't remember. Over his shoulder, I caught a glimpse of something tall and angular disappearing down the hallway. But when I blinked, it was gone. For a brief moment, I felt a sense of terror and loss so profound, it took my breath away. Then that too was gone, leaving only the emptiness. The stranger David was crying now, pulling out his phone to call someone, talking about hospitals and memory loss, and how I'd been fine just yesterday when we spoke. I stood there, watching him, feeling nothing. No recognition, no connection. No fear. The countdown had reached 0, and I had become no one. Sometimes, in the years that followed, I would catch glimpses of numbers out of the corner of my eye. Sequences that seemed to be counting down. But whenever I tried to focus on them, they would disappear, leaving me with nothing but a vague sense of unease. I couldn't explain, and sometimes, in my dreams, I hear a voice like rustling leaves and snapping twigs, whispering. Until next time. Story 5. I never believed in haunted places. As a nature photographer who spent countless nights in remote locations, I'd heard all the stories, strange noises in the wilderness, unexplained phenomena, the usual campfire tales. I always dismissed them as the imagination running wild in the darkness. That was before I found the cabin in Blackwood Forest. It was supposed to be a routine assignment. The magazine wanted photos of the elusive Kirtland's warbler that had recently been spotted in this remote stretch of old-growth forest. 3 days of hiking and camping, 4 at most. I'd packed light, camera equipment, food, tent, the essentials. The weather forecast had been clear when I left, but anyone who's spent time in these mountains knows how quickly that can change. The storm rolled in during my second afternoon. The sky darkened to an ominous gray within minutes, and the wind picked up with surprising ferocity. Fat raindrops began to fall, quickly becoming a deluge that rendered my rain gear useless. Lightning cracked overhead, too close for comfort, and I knew I needed to find shelter fast. I abandoned the trail, heading deeper into the forest where the canopy might offer some protection. That's when I saw it through the curtain of rain, a wooden structure, partially hidden among the pines. A cabin. It looked old but sturdy, with dark timber walls and a slanted roof. No lights shone from within, no smoke from the chimney. It appeared abandoned, a forgotten relic in the wilderness. The door creaked open at my touch, swinging inward to reveal a dusty interior cast in shadows. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing slightly. No response. The cabin consisted of one main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, a wooden table with chairs, and a door that presumably led to a bedroom. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, undisturbed except for my own wet footprints on the wooden floor. Relief washed over me. I'd wait out the storm here, dry my clothes, and continue my expedition once the weather cleared. I found some old logs by the fireplace, and thankfully matches in a drawer. Soon, a small fire cast dancing shadows across the walls, and I hung my soaked clothes nearby to dry. Outside, the storm raged on, rain lashing against the windows, thunder rumbling across the sky. I explored the cabin while waiting for my clothes to dry. The bedroom contained a simple bed with a metal frame, a nightstand, and a chest of drawers. In the kitchen area, I found canned goods that had expired years ago. Everything suggested the cabin had been abandoned for some time, yet it remained in surprisingly good condition, as if someone had been maintaining it despite its apparent disuse. Night fell, and with the storm showing no signs of abating, I resigned myself to spending the night. I'd found some old blankets in a chest that smelled musty but weren't damp, so I made a makeshift bed on the floor near the fireplace. The crackling flames and the rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof soon lulled me to sleep. I don't know exactly what time it was when I first heard the voices. At first I thought I was dreaming. Muffled conversations, distant laughter, the sound of footsteps moving across wooden floors. I opened my eyes to darkness. The fire had burned down to embers, but the cabin was empty. Yet the sounds continued, like an old radio playing in another room. The words indistinct, but the cadence of conversation unmistakable. I sat up, heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out again. The voices stopped immediately. I fumbled for my flashlight and shone it around the room. Nothing had changed. I was alone. Convincing myself it had been a dream, I added another log to the fire and tried to go back to sleep. But as soon as I closed my eyes, the sounds returned: a woman's laugh, a man's deep voice responding, the patter of what sounded like children's feet running across the floor above me. But there was no floor above me. The cabin was single-story. I spent the rest of the night sitting up, back against the wall, flashlight in hand. The sounds came and went, sometimes clear enough that I could almost make out words. Other times so faint I questioned whether I was hearing anything at all. By the time dawn broke, I was exhausted and on edge, but relieved to see the storm had passed. I should have left then, packed my things and continued my assignment, but curiosity got the better of me. What had I heard in the night? Was there some rational explanation? I decided to investigate the cabin more thoroughly in the daylight. That's when I found the trap door. It was hidden under an old rug in the corner of the main room. A square cut into the floorboards with a metal ring pull. It took some effort to open, the wood swollen with age and humidity. Below was a small cellar, accessible by a ladder that disappeared into darkness. I shone my flashlight down, revealing a dirt floor and what appeared to be old crates and boxes. One user claimed to have escaped their contract by finding someone willing to take their place. Another suggested that these entities could only collect if you remembered the deal, that forgetting was a form of protection. Others insisted that the only solution was to confront the entity directly and renegotiate. None of these options seemed feasible or ethical. I couldn't pass this curse to someone else. I couldn't simply make myself forget again, and clearly that protection had its limits anyway. And the thought of deliberately seeking out this thing terrified me to my core. So I watched the countdown continue, day after day, wondering what perfect conditions it was waiting for. The answer came 3 weeks later, when the countdown suddenly began accelerating. The numbers decreased faster and faster, until they were dropping by hundreds per hour. That same day, my brother called to tell me he was coming to visit, the same brother who had miraculously recovered 15 years ago. I understood then. The perfect condition was having us both in the same place. Whatever bargain I'd made involved both of us. The countdown would reach 0 precisely when my brother arrived at my apartment. I considered warning him, telling him not to come, but a strange compulsion stopped me every time I tried to call him. My fingers would dial different numbers, or my voice would discuss completely unrelated topics. The entity wasn't going to let me interfere with its plans. On the day of my brother's visit, with the countdown showing just a few hours remaining, I made one last desperate attempt to break free. I drove to the woods again, to that same clearing with the dead tree. This time, I brought the journal with me. I know you can hear me. I called out to the empty clearing. I want to renegotiate. The air grew still. Birds fell silent. The temperature dropped so suddenly that my breath fogged in front of me despite the summer heat. What do you offer? The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, sounding like dry leaves rustling and twigs snapping. Anything but what you're planning to take, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Tell me what you want instead. A sound like laughter surrounded me, though nothing about it suggested humor or joy. You already gave me what I wanted. Your brother lives because I wished it so. Now I collect what was promised. But what exactly did I promise? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. The journal doesn't say specifically. The air in front of me shimmered, and for a brief moment I could almost see a shape forming, tall, angular, wrong in ways my mind couldn't quite process. You promised an exchange, a life for a life. His was fading. Now yours will take its place. But he recovered 15 years ago. Why wait until now? Time means nothing to me, and watching you forget. Then remember, then forget again. It has been amusing. Your fear is delicious. The shape became slightly more defined, and I caught glimpses of too many limbs, angles that shouldn't be possible, and darkness where features should be. Please, I begged. There must be something else you want. The entity seemed to consider this. Perhaps. Another exchange. Not your life, but something else of value. What? Your memories. All of them. You will live, but you will know nothing of who you were. Your brother will remember you, but you will not remember him. You will be empty, a blank slate. Is this preferable to you? I hesitated. To lose everything that made me who I was, every experience, every relationship, every skill I'd learned. Was that better than death? Would I even be me anymore, without my memories? But as I considered the alternative, I thought of my brother. He'd been given 15 extra years of life already. If I died now, would that debt transfer back to him? I couldn't risk it. Yes, I finally said. Take my memories instead. The air shimmered again, and I felt something cold brush against my forehead. It is done. When the countdown reaches 0, you will forget. I drove home in a daze, wondering if I'd made the right choice. The countdown on my phone now read just 2 hours. My brother would arrive soon. I tried to prepare somehow, writing notes to my future self explaining who I was, who he was, what had happened. But as I wrote, the ink faded from the page as if it had never been there. The entity wasn't going to let me leave myself any lifelines. With 30 minutes remaining, I heard a knock at my door. My brother had arrived early. As I moved to answer it, I glanced at my phone one last time. The countdown read, 1 minute left. I opened the door to see my brother's smiling face. "Mark, it's so good to see you." I tried to speak, to warn him, to say goodbye, but no words came out. Behind him, in the hallway, I saw the tall, angular shape materialize fully for the first time. It had no features I could describe, nothing my human mind could properly process. It reached for me with limbs that bent in impossible ways. "Mark." My brother's smile faltered. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." The entity's limb touched my forehead, and ice spread through my veins. The countdown in my mind reached 0, and then, nothing. I blinked at the man standing in my doorway. He looked concerned, almost frightened. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Do I know you?" The man's face crumpled in confusion and pain. "Mark, it's me, your brother David." I shook my head slowly. The name meant nothing to me. Nothing meant anything to me. I felt hollow, empty, as if I'd just been born into an adult body with no history behind me. "I'm sorry," I repeated. I don't remember." Over his shoulder, I caught a glimpse of something tall and angular disappearing down the hallway, but when I blinked, it was gone. For a brief moment, I felt a sense of terror and loss so profound it took my breath away. Then that too was gone, leaving only the emptiness. The stranger David was crying now, pulling out his phone to call someone, talking about hospitals and memory loss, and how I'd been fine just yesterday when we spoke. I stood there, watching him, feeling nothing, no recognition, no fear. The countdown had reached 0, and I had become no one. Sometimes, in the years that followed, I would catch glimpses of numbers out of the corner of my eye, sequences that seemed to be counting down. But whenever I tried to focus on them, they would disappear, leaving me with nothing but a vague sense of unease I couldn't explain. And sometimes in my dreams, I hear a voice like rustling leaves and snapping twigs, whispering, "Until next time." I hesitated only briefly before descending. The cellar was cold and smelled of damp earth, and something else I couldn't quite identify, something else. My flashlight beam revealed shelves lined with dusty mason jars, their contents long since spoiled. The crates contained old tools, lanterns, and other miscellaneous items you'd expect to find in a cabin's storage. But in the far corner, partially hidden behind a stack of boxes, I found a leather-bound book, a journal. The cover was cracked with age, the pages yellowed and brittle. I carefully brought it up to the main room where I could examine it in better light. The journal belonged to a man named Thomas Blackwood, dated 30 years earlier. He wrote about bringing his family, wife Eleanor and children, James and Sarah, to the cabin for a summer vacation. The first entries were mundane: fishing trips, hikes in the forest, repairs made to the cabin. But as I turned the pages, the tone began to shift. Thomas wrote about hearing things in the night, voices, footsteps, sounds that couldn't be explained. His handwriting became increasingly erratic, the entries more disjointed. He described arguments with Eleanor, who wanted to leave the cabin, insisting there was something wrong with this place. Thomas refused, becoming obsessed with the sounds, staying up all night trying to record or trace them. Then came entries about the children acting strangely, speaking to people who weren't there, staring at empty corners of the room, waking up screaming about the people in the walls. Eleanor's fear turned to anger, the arguments escalated, and Thomas wrote about feeling constantly on edge, irritable, paranoid. The final entries were the most disturbing. Thomas described feeling like he was being taken over, his thoughts replaced by darker ones that didn't feel like his own. He wrote about violent impulses, about watching his family sleep and having terrible ideas. The very last entry, dated August 17th, simply read, "They won't stop whispering, they want me to do things. God forgive me for what I'm about to do." The journal ended there. I sat for a long time, the book open in my hands, a chill running down my spine. Despite the fire I'd rebuilt, what had happened to the Blackwood family Had Thomas acted on those terrible ideas? And what did it have to do with the voices I'd heard myself? I decided to search the cabin more thoroughly. In the bedroom, I pulled back the rug and found dark stains on the wooden floor that could have been blood. In the main room, near the fireplace, I noticed scratch marks on the floorboards, as if someone had clawed desperately at the wood. And on the inside of the front door, nearly invisible, unless you were looking for it, I found a child's handprint in what appeared to be dried blood. My heart was racing now, and I knew I needed to leave. I quickly gathered my belongings, shoving them haphazardly into my backpack. But as I reached for the door, I heard it again, voices, clearer now than they had been in the night. A woman sobbing, a child pleading. A man's voice, low and threatening. I yanked open the door, desperate to escape, but another storm had moved in while I'd been investigating. The rain was coming down in sheets, the wind howling through the trees. Lightning illuminated the forest in brief, stark flashes. I stood in the doorway, torn between facing the storm and spending another night in what I was now convinced was a very haunted cabin. In the end, the weather made the decision for me. A lightning strike hit a tree not 50 yards from the cabin, sending it crashing to the ground in a shower of sparks. I jumped back inside and slammed the door. My hands shaking, I was trapped, at least until the storm passed. As the day wore on, I became increasingly uneasy. The voices came and went, sometimes so real and present, I would spin around, certain someone was standing right behind me. I found myself talking back to them, first telling them to leave me alone, then asking questions, trying to understand what they wanted. By evening, I had a pounding headache and felt irritable and on edge. I caught myself muttering under my breath, arguing with thoughts that didn't seem entirely my own. When I looked in a small mirror hanging on the wall, my reflection seemed somehow wrong. My eyes too dark, my expression unfamiliar. Night fell, and with it came a new intensity to the phenomena. The temperature in the cabin dropped dramatically. Objects moved when I wasn't looking directly at them. A cup sliding across the table, a book falling from a shelf. The voices grew louder, more distinct. I could now make out specific phrases. Don't let him near the children. He's got the axe again. Please, Tom. This isn't you. Daddy, stop. I huddled by the fire, hands over my ears, but it did nothing to block the sounds. And then I noticed something on the mantelpiece that I was certain hadn't been there before: an axe. Old and rusted, its handle dark with what looked like decades-old bloodstains. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and when it passed, I found the axe in my hand, though I had no memory of picking it up. It felt right somehow, the weight of it, the rough wooden handle against my palm. A strange calm settled over me, and with it came new thoughts that didn't feel like my own. They're hiding from you. They deserve what's coming. Finish what was started. I shook my head violently, trying to clear it. This wasn't me. These weren't my thoughts. I forced myself to put the axe down, backing away from it as if it might leap into my hands again of its own accord. That's when I noticed the journal on the table, open to a page I hadn't seen before. The handwriting was different from Thomas's earlier entries, pressed so hard into the paper that it had torn in places. It read, "The cabin wants blood. It always has. It whispers and whispers, until you give it what it wants. I am not the first. There were others before me, and there will be others after. The cabin calls to them, draws them in during storms, speaks to them in the night, and one by one, they do its bidding. As I did, as you will." The last line sent ice through my veins. As you will. I slammed the journal shut and backed away. The voices had stopped, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. I could feel the cabin waiting, watching, wanting. The axe gleamed in the firelight, almost beckoning. With sudden clarity, I understood what was happening. The cabin itself was the entity not haunted, but a haunt. It absorbed the violence that occurred within its walls, fed on it, and then compelled others to recreate it. An endless cycle of horror. I had to break the cycle. I had to get out. But the cabin didn't want me to leave. As I moved toward the door, the temperature dropped further, my breath fogging in the air. The door itself seemed to recede, The room stretching impossibly. The voices returned, no longer distinct but a cacophony of screams and pleas and threats. The axe vibrated on the mantelpiece, then fell to the floor with a heavy thud. My head felt like it was splitting open. Images flashed through my mind, a woman running, children hiding under a bed, my own hands raising the axe high, then bringing it down again and again. But they weren't my memories, they were Thomas's. Or perhaps they belonged to whoever had come before Thomas, and before them, back and back through the cabin's bloody history. I fought against the compulsion, against the cabin's will trying to override my own. I staggered to my backpack and fumbled inside for my emergency kit. Matches. I needed matches. The cabin seemed to realize what I intended. The wind outside howled louder, rattling the windows. Objects began flying across the room, books, cups, anything not nailed down. The axe skittered across the floor toward me, as if pushed by invisible hands. I found the matches, and with shaking hands, struck one. It flared brightly, then went out. A second, a third, the fourth stayed lit, and I touched it to the curtains, which caught immediately. I moved quickly, setting fire to the bed linens, the papers on the table, anything that would burn. The cabin fought back. Sudden gust blew through the room, extinguishing some of the smaller fires. The temperature dropped further, ice forming on the windows. The axe rose from the floor, hovering momentarily before flying toward me. I ducked, and it embedded itself in the wall behind me. But the fires were spreading, the larger ones taking hold, despite the cabin's resistance. Smoke filled the room, acrid and thick. The voices had become a single, unified howl of rage and frustration. I made for the door, expecting resistance, but it flew open at my touch, as if the cabin was now trying to expel me. I stumbled outside into the rain, which had lessened to a steady drizzle. Behind me, orange flames licked at the windows, illuminating the night. I didn't stop to watch. I ran, splashing through puddles, branches whipping at my face, until I reached the trail. Only then did I turn back. The cabin was fully engulfed, a bright beacon in the dark forest. As I watched, the roof collapsed inward with a shower of sparks. The voices were gone, replaced by the crackle of flames and the distant wail of timber giving way. I spent the night on the trail, huddled under a large pine, too afraid to sleep. At dawn, I hiked out of the forest and drove straight to the nearest town. At the local diner, over numerous cups of coffee, I asked the waitress if she knew anything about an old cabin in Blackwood Forest. "Oh, you mean the Blackwood place," she said, refilling my cup. "Terrible thing that happened there. Family of 4 back in the 90s. Father went crazy, killed his wife and kids with an axe, then himself. They say the place is haunted. The cabin burned down last night." I told her. "I saw it." She gave me an odd look. "That's not possible, honey. The Blackwood cabin burned down 30 years ago, right after the murders. There's nothing out there now but foundation stones. I never returned to Blackwood Forest." I told myself the stress of the storm, combined with the suggestive power of the journal, had caused some kind of temporary psychosis. The voices, the axe, the fire, all hallucinations, manifestations of an overtired mind. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear whispers. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, my reflection seems to smile in a way I never do, my eyes darker than they should be. And I wonder if I truly left the cabin behind, or if I brought a piece of it with me. If its cycle of violence continues not in timber and stone, but in flesh and blood. Because the most terrifying thought of all is this: what if the cabin was never really there? What if the entity, whatever it is, simply takes the form most likely to draw in its next victim? And what form might it take next time, when it finds someone new to continue its bloody work? I don't know. But I do know this: if you're ever hiking in remote forests and a storm rolls in, forcing you to seek shelter, be very careful about what doors you open. Some thresholds, once crossed, can never truly be left behind. Story 6. I still remember the first time I saw it. That single glistening eye peering up at me through the drain of my bathtub. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, perhaps a reflection of something in my bathroom. Or maybe just my imagination running wild after a particularly stressful day at work. But deep down, I knew what I had seen, and I knew it had seen me too. My name is Daniel Mercer. And until 3 months ago I was living what most would consider a perfectly ordinary life. I had recently accepted a promotion that required me to relocate to Millhaven, a small coastal town with a rich history, and affordable housing, a rare combination these days. After weeks of searching, I finally found an apartment in the historic district, in a building that dated back to the early 1900s. The rent was surprisingly reasonable for such a well-maintained property in a desirable location. But I didn't question my good fortune. Perhaps I should have. The apartment itself was charming, with high ceilings, ornate moldings, and large windows that let in plenty of natural light. The bathroom, however, was clearly a later addition, with modern fixtures that seemed somewhat at odds with the rest of the space. Still, I was pleased to have a large clawfoot bathtub rather than just a shower stall. After years of cramped apartment living, the thought of being able to soak in a proper bath was genuinely exciting. I moved in on a rainy Saturday in October. After the movers had left and I'd unpacked the essentials, I decided to treat myself to a hot bath to ease my aching muscles. I filled the tub with steaming water, added some Epsom salts I'd packed in my toiletry bag, and eased myself in with a contented sigh. The water was perfect, and I felt the tension of the move beginning to melt away as I closed my eyes and leaned back against the smooth porcelain. That's when I first felt it, a strange sensation of being watched. My eyes snapped open and I glanced around the empty bathroom. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the feeling persisted. I tried to shake it off, attributing it to the unfamiliarity of new surroundings, but I couldn't fully relax after that. When the water began to cool, I pulled the plug and started to rise from the tub. As the water drained away, I happened to glance down at the plug. What I saw made me freeze. One foot still in the tub, the other hovering above the bath mat. There in the small circular drain was an eye. Not the eye of any fish or known aquatic creature, but something that looked disturbingly human, yet not quite. It was larger than a human eye should be, with an iris of such a pale blue. It was almost white, surrounded by a sclera that had a faint greenish tinge. As I stared at it in shock, it blinked once, slowly, then seemed to recede into the darkness of the drain. I scrambled out of the tub, nearly slipping on the wet floor in my haste. Heart pounding, I grabbed a towel and wrapped it around myself, then cautiously approached the bathtub again. The water had fully drained by now, and the plug appeared normal, just a small dark opening leading to the pipes below. I knelt beside the tub and peered into the drain, half expecting to see that unnerving eye staring back at me, but there was nothing. "You're just tired," I told myself aloud, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet bathroom. New place, new stresses. Your mind is playing tricks on you. But even as I said the words, I didn't believe them. What I had seen had felt too real, too detailed to be a mere hallucination. That night I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale blue iris staring at me. Around 3 in the morning, I finally gave up on sleep and decided to do some research on the building's history, hoping it might provide some rational explanation for what I'd experienced, or at least distract me from my unsettling thoughts. The Blackwood Apartments, as my building was called, had been constructed in 1908 by a wealthy merchant named Edward Blackwood. According to the local Historical Society's website, the land had previously been the site of one of the town's earliest water wells, which had served the community for nearly a century before being decommissioned in the late 1800s, when the town established a modern water system. Rather than filling in the well completely, Blackwood had incorporated it into the building's design, using it as part of the foundation and water system. This information gave me pause. Could there be some connection between the old well and what I'd seen? Perhaps some kind of unusual marine life had somehow made its way into the building's plumbing system from an underground water source connected to the sea. It seemed far-fetched, but it was more plausible than the alternatives my imagination was conjuring. The next morning, bleary-eyed from lack of sleep, I decided to speak with the building manager, Mr. Hargrove, about my concerns. He was a thin, elderly man with a perpetual frown who lived in a ground-floor apartment and handled maintenance issues for the building's owner. "Plumbing problems already?" he asked when I mentioned the bathroom. "That's unusual. Those pipes were all replaced just 5 years ago. It's not exactly a problem," I explained hesitantly, unsure how to describe what I'd seen without sounding completely unhinged. "I just noticed something strange when I was draining the bathtub. It looked like there was something in the drain. Something alive." Hargrove's expression changed suddenly, a tightening around the eyes, a slight compression of his lips before he nodded dismissively. "Probably just a bit of algae. These old buildings, sometimes you get growth in the pipes, despite our best efforts. I'll come take a look." He followed me up to my apartment and examined the bathtub drain, poking at it with a small flashlight and a long, thin tool that looked like a dental pick. His inspection was thorough but quick, and he seemed eager to finish and leave the bathroom. "Everything looks normal to me," he declared, straightening up with a grunt. "No blockages, no unusual growth. If you see anything else concerning, let me know. But I suspect it was just a shadow or reflection you saw." As he spoke, his eyes darted briefly to the small frosted window above the bathtub, then back to me. There was something in his manner that struck me as odd, and nervousness that seemed out of proportion to the situation. "Hargrove," I said as he was turning to leave, "do you know anything about the well that used to be on this property? The one the building was constructed over?" He paused in the doorway, his back to me. "Just old stories," he replied without turning around. "Nothing worth repeating. Old towns like this, they collect tales over the years. Most of them are nonsense." "What kind of stories?" I pressed. He sighed and finally turned to face me. "Look, Mr. Mercer, I've been managing this building for over 20 years. Yes, there are local legends about the old well, but I've never seen anything to suggest they're anything more than that, legends. People talk about the well dwellers or those who live below, but it's just folklore. Every town has its bogeyman." With that, he left, and I was left with more questions than answers. That night, I couldn't bring myself to use the bathtub. I took a quick shower instead, keeping my eyes averted from the drain the entire time. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself that what I'd seen had indeed been a trick of the light or a product of an overtired mind. I even managed to use the bathtub again, though I was tense the entire time, and drained the water while standing outside the tub, watching from a distance. It was nearly a week later when I saw it again, or rather then. I had come home late from work and decided to take a bath to unwind. As I soaked in the warm water, that familiar sensation of being watched returned, stronger than before. This time, when I pulled the plug and the water began to drain, I forced myself to look directly at the plug hole. There wasn't just one eye this time. There were 3 crowded together in the small space, blinking up at me in an unsettling, asynchronous pattern. They were the same as before, too large, too pale, with that faint greenish tinge to the whites. As I watched in horror, one of them seemed to move closer to the opening, revealing more of itself. I could now see that the skin around the eye was not human skin at all, but something smooth and pale, almost translucent, like the belly of certain deep-sea fish. I stumbled backward, water splashing over the edge of the tub, as I scrambled to get away. My foot caught on the bath mat, and I fell hard against the sink cabinet, pain shooting through my hip. By the time I regained my composure enough to look back at the drain, the eyes were gone. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I sat up researching local folklore, specifically anything related to wells or underground water systems in Millhaven. What I found disturbed me deeply. According to several obscure local history blogs and forums dedicated to regional mythology, there were indeed stories about the well dwellers, or those who watch from below. These legends dated back to the town's founding in the early 1800s and spoke of creatures that lived in the underground water systems, occasionally peering up at the human world through wells. springs, and later drains and pipes. Most accounts describe them as having human-like features but adapted for aquatic life. Pale, almost translucent skin, large light-sensitive eyes, and elongated limbs with webbed digits. They were said to be intelligent and curious about humans, watching us from their watery domain. Some stories painted them as merely observant, while others suggested more sinister motives, claiming they would occasionally lure people into the water, never to be seen again. What struck me most was a recurring detail in many of the accounts. The creatures were said to be most active during the full moon, when the tides were highest, and the boundary between their world and ours was supposedly at its thinnest. I checked my calendar with growing unease. The next full moon was just 5 days away. The following morning, I decided to visit the local library to see if I could find more information about the well and the legends surrounding it. The librarian, an older woman named Mrs. Patel, seemed unsurprised by my interest. The Blackwood Well has quite a history, she told me as she led me to a section of local historical documents. It was one of the deepest in the area, and was known for its unusually cold water, even in summer. Some said it connected to underwater caverns that led all the way to the ocean, though that was never proven. She pulled out a leather-bound volume from a locked case. This is a collection of local accounts and folklore compiled in the 1950s. There's a section on the well that might interest you. The book contains several first-hand accounts from the 1800s, describing strange sightings associated with the well. One entry dated 18. Today, young Thomas Fletcher came running into town in a state of great distress, claiming to have seen eyes watching him from the Blackwood Well. The boy insists that when he peered into the well to check the water level, he saw not his own reflection but several pale faces looking back at him from beneath the water's surface. His father believes he was merely startled by his own reflection in the dark water, but the boy remains adamant. This is the third such report this month, all coinciding with the full moon. Another account from 1887, shortly before the well was decommissioned, was even more disturbing. The disappearance of Sarah Collins remains unsolved. She was last seen drawing water from the Blackwood Well at dusk on the night of the full moon. Her bucket was found beside the well, but of Sarah herself there was no trace. Some claim to have heard a splash and a brief scream, but by the time help arrived, there was nothing to be found. This marks the 7th disappearance associated with the well in the past 50 years, all occurring on or near the full moon. As I read, a chill ran down my spine. These accounts were too similar to what I had experienced to be mere coincidence. When I returned the book to Mrs. Patel, I couldn't help but ask if she believed any of the stories. She gave me a measured look before responding. "I've lived in Millhaven all my life, Mr. Mercer, and I've learned that every legend has a kernel of truth at its center. Whether that truth is exactly what the stories claim is another matter. But I will say this, if I lived in the Blackwood apartments, I wouldn't use the plumbing during a full moon." Her words stayed with me as I returned to my apartment. That evening I decided to try experiment. I filled the bathtub halfway, then added a small amount of red food coloring I had in my kitchen for baking. If there really were creatures in the pipes watching me, I wanted to see how they would react to something unusual. I let the colored water sit for about an hour, occasionally checking the drain for any sign of the eyes. Nothing appeared. Finally, I pulled the plug and watched as the reddish water swirled down the drain. Just as the last of it disappeared, I caught a glimpse of movement, not eyes this time, but what looked like the tip of a pale webbed finger, quickly withdrawn as if the red color had startled or concerned whatever was down there. My heart racing, I decided to take more drastic action. The next day, I purchased a small waterproof camera designed for plumbing inspections. It was expensive, but I needed evidence either to confirm my fears or, hopefully, to prove to myself that I was imagining things. That evening, I carefully lowered the camera into the bathtub drain, watching the live feed on my tablet. At first, I saw only what you would expect, the inside of a normal drain pipe, slightly grimy but otherwise unremarkable. I extended the camera further, navigating the bends in the pipe with the flexible cable. After about 3 feet, the pipe joined a larger vertical pipe that I assumed led down to the main sewer line. As I angled the camera to look down this pipe, The image suddenly went dark, as if something had covered the lens. When the picture returned a moment later, the camera was showing a different area entirely, a much larger, open space that didn't look like any part of a modern plumbing system. The walls appeared to be made of old stone, slick with moisture and covered in some kind of bioluminescent growth that cast a faint greenish glow. The space looked like part of an old well shaft that had been incorporated into the building's foundation, just as the historical information had suggested. As I watched, transfixed, something moved at the edge of the frame, a pale shape that quickly darted out of view. I tried to maneuver the camera to follow it, but the cable suddenly went slack in my hands. On the screen, I could see the camera tumbling through water before coming to rest on what appeared to be a stone floor, now pointing up at a circular opening far above, presumably the bottom of the well shaft I had just been exploring. And then, to my horror, a face moved into frame. It was humanoid but clearly not human. The skin pale and nearly translucent, the features flattened as if adapted for underwater movement, and the eyes those same pale blue, oversized eyes I had seen in my drain blinking curiously at the camera. The creature reached toward the lens with a webbed hand, and the feed went dead. I dropped the tablet as if it had burned me, scrambling backward until I hit the bathroom wall. My mind raced, trying to process what I had just seen. It was real, all of it was real. The legends, the stories, the disappearances. There really were creatures living in the water system beneath the building. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and called Mr. Hargrove. When he answered, I didn't bother with pleasantries. The well dwellers, I said, my voice unsteady. They're real. I've seen them. I have proof. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Mr. Hargrove spoke, his voice low and serious. Where are you now, Mr. Mercer? In my apartment, in the bathroom. I used a camera, I saw them. Another pause. Stay where you are. Don't use any water, don't go near the drains. I'll be right up. He arrived at my door less than 5 minutes later, looking grave. I showed him the tablet with the now frozen final image from the camera feed. The pale face staring into the lens. Mr. Hargrove sighed heavily. I was afraid of this. The full moon is getting closer. You knew? I accused. You knew they were real. He nodded slowly. My family has managed this building for 3 generations. We've always known. Most of the time they're just curious. They watch, they don't interfere. But during the full moon, especially certain full moons, they become more active. What do you mean? Certain full moons. Every 50 years, there's a particular lunar cycle that affects the tides in a specific way. During that time, the boundary between their world and ours thins even more than usual. They can cross over to some extent. I stared at him in disbelief. And when is the next one of these special full moons? His expression told me everything I needed to know before he even spoke. 5 days from now. The following days were a blur of anxiety and preparation. Mr. Hargrove provided me with more information about the creatures which he called the tidal folk, and the history of their interactions with the building's residents. According to him, as long as certain precautions were taken, there was little danger. Cover all drains with salt, he instructed. They can't tolerate it. And stay away from water sources during the full moon night. No showers, no running taps, nothing that might serve as a portal. I followed his advice, purchasing large containers of salt and covering every drain in my apartment. I also decided to spend the night of the full moon elsewhere, booking a hotel room in a modern building across town. Mr. Hargrove approved of this plan, though he assured me that with proper precautions, I would have been safe in my apartment as well. We've lived alongside them for generations, he explained. There's an understanding of sorts. They observe us, we acknowledge them, but keep our distance. Problems only arise when that balance is disturbed. The night before the full moon, I packed an overnight bag for my hotel stay. As I was preparing to leave, a sudden downpour began, the start of what the weather service was calling a significant storm system moving up the coast. By morning, the rain was coming down in sheets, and flood warnings had been issued for low-lying areas of town. I tried to remain calm as I drove through the increasingly waterlogged streets toward my hotel. The radio reported that several roads were already closed due to flooding, and the rain showed no signs of letting up. As I turned onto the main highway that would take me to the other side of town, I found it blocked by emergency vehicles. A police officer informed me that a section of the road had been washed out, and all traffic was being diverted back into town. With growing unease, I tried alternate routes, only to find them either flooded or jammed with other diverted vehicles. After 2 hours of fruitless attempts to leave the area, I reluctantly returned to my apartment building. The full moon was that night, and I was trapped in the one place I had been determined to avoid. Mr. Hargrove looked concerned when I told him about my failed escape attempt. "The storm is unprecedented," he said, shaking his head. "I've never seen flooding like this during a boundary moon. It's as if